I'm standing above the Danube. Over on the shore, you can see the beautiful old town. And this bridge is the Stone Bridge. Built at the beginning of the 12th century, it's believed to be the oldest surviving bridge in Germany. I'm in Regensburg, in Bavaria. To be honest, the bridge doesn't look that old. That's because it's been completely restored over the past few years. After all, Regensburg has a title to defend. Since 2006, its old town, including this bridge, has been a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Today I want to get to know Regensburg. What attracts visitors to this UNESCO World Heritage Site, and what does the constant influx of tourists mean for the city? This much is certain: it's going to be a journey through 2,000 years of history.
We'll also show you nearby Weltenburg Abbey. We'll find out what the growing popularity of cruise ship tourism means for Regensburg. And we'll catch up with our globetrotter in the city of Cartagena in Colombia. The fact that Regensburg is such an old and well-preserved city is largely thanks to it not having been destroyed in the wars and its importance as an imperial city in past centuries. A testimony to its former significance is the Gothic cathedral. Construction began in the 13th century. And the cathedral tells us a lot about that time, as the facade also depicts the crueler side of the Middle Ages. The church vilified Jews. This sculpture shows them suckling from a pig, a deliberate insult and humiliation, as pigs are considered unclean in Judaism. Even so, the building as a whole is an impressive monument. Next to the one in Cologne, Regensburg Cathedral is considered to be Germany's most extraordinary Gothic cathedral. Regensburg was not only important because it became a bishop's seat fairly early on. The Danube was a significant trade and traffic route. And here, on its banks, in the old town hall, the perpetual Diet, or Reichstag, was held for over 140 years. To find out more about what that was and what it meant for the city, I'm meeting the director of the Regensburg Museums, Doris Gerstl. What exactly was the perpetual Diet?
From the 17th to the early 19th century, Regensburg was actually the capital of Europe, a bit like Brussels today. The Perpetual Diet was convened in 1663, just a few years after the 30 Years' War. Representatives from all countries, from all cities gathered here. They were supposed to discuss taxes and military issues, but the talks then dragged on for so long that they never came to a final agreement. Or at least not for 143 years, until 1806.
Why was it set up in Regensburg?
Several big gatherings had already taken place in Regensburg. The city is located on the Danube, so the emperor was able to travel to Vienna along the river. That infrastructure was unique and offered short travel times. Messages could reach the chancellery in Vienna within 3 days, and vice versa. Next to the infrastructure, there was a second key factor, namely that Regensburg was an imperial city. It was not part of the surrounding Duchy of Bavaria, but was directly subordinate to the emperor and more or less belonged to him.
What did the Reichstag mean for Regensburg? I imagine so many powerful people coming here meant money was being spent. And it probably brought the city some other perks too.
Vorteil für die Stadt, oder?
Of course. Regensburg was a prosperous city and an international meeting place. Almost every attic was rented out to Diet envoys or to their entourages. The city was booming. A lot of diplomats held negotiations with other countries here because it was a shorter distance to travel. Back then, the city had international flair.
Doris Gerstl calls my attention to an interesting mural. The bird on the wall is standing on one foot and holding a stone in its claw. It's meant to remind the envoys to pay close attention to the debates. Whoever falls asleep is dropping the ball, or here the stone, and disturbing the Diet.
Admittedly, there's no way for me to know how the envoys spent their free time all those years ago, but my guess would be that more than once they found themselves just a couple of kilometers up the river at the Danube Gorge. It's where Weltenburg Convent stands. It's home to one of Germany's oldest breweries, and up to this day, well worth a visit.
The most beautiful route to Weltenburg Abbey takes you across the river, through the Danube Gorge, between limestone walls up to 70 meters high. For the full experience, hop on Etzille, the traditional boat of the Danube fishermen.
Once upon a time, rowing was the only option, but no one does that anymore. Now we have a motor, but we often turn it off to give people the full experience. You can hear the silence. It's very special. When you hear nothing, you can see a lot.
For example, you can see the rock formation the Three Warring Brothers. Alternatively, you could hike. Like Hedi and Hermann Riemann. For them, hiking is not recreation, it's work. The couple runs the small restaurant Einsiedlei Klöstal, or Little Hermitage, which you can only reach by foot. It's worth the journey. The building complex used to be a Franciscan monastery founded by a hermit. The unique church has no proper roof, only the cliff which curves overhead. The frescoes with biblical scenes are from the 16th century. Hermann Riemann found out by chance that the historic hermitage was for sale and turned it into a heritage site.
This beautiful rock church had been closed for years. I wanted to put it back in the spotlight and open it to the public.
The first guests arrive early in the morning and are given a tour of a cave right next to the church.
This cave is called Gold Oven, as an alchemist once lived here. These pits in the rocks were carved by hand and housed wooden beams, used probably to support a wooden house.
We reach our destination, Weltenburg Abbey. An impressive building right on the Danube. Monks settled here in around the year 617. That makes it the oldest monastery in Bavaria. Over the years, the Benedictine monks kept on building their abbey. The 18th century church owes its splendor to the Assam brothers, who designed many Baroque churches in Bavaria. But for many guests, the reason they came is the beer garden. Beer has been brewed in the monastery for more than 1,000 years. Another reason why more than 500,000 people come to Weltenburg Abbey every year.
Where are you from?
From China.
From Spain, yes, Barcelona.
We are from South Korea, from Busan, and we enjoyed very much this cluster, and especially this beer. Cheers.
Back in the slightly rainy Regensburg, I have an appointment with Matthias Freitag. At the Neupfarrplatz, he shows me the outlines of the former Jewish synagogue. Regensburg is like many medieval cities. If you dig here, it's likely you'll discover something. In 1995, traces of the 2,000-year history of the city were uncovered during construction work on Neupfarrplatz.
Ja, Sie haben ja gemerkt, wir sind
As you've probably noticed, we're underground now. What's exciting here is that you can see recognizable old remains. The wall with the ark, that's classical Middle Ages, about 700 to 800 years old. Now, if you take a step forward and look down over the parapet, you see those stones. They may not look that special, but they're from Roman times, 2,000 years ago.
2000 Jahre. Wenn wir durch diesen Bogen
And if we go through this ark, we come to a second
So,
cellar.
wir kommen also jetzt hier in einen zweiten Keller. Und da ist
What's
jetzt natürlich
interesting here is that all the cellars in the documentation
ganzen
center
Keller,
come from the
die wir hier
former
in
Jewish quarter in
Dokumentation
Regensburg.
sind Keller des ehemaligen jüdischen Viertels in Regensburg. Und was wir hier sehen, sind die
So what we're
Spuren
seeing
dieser
here are traces of the Jewish
jüdischen
families in Regensburg.
Die haben 500
They lived in
Jahre
the city
der
for
Stadt
500
gelebt,
years.
wissen wir. Und am
Then,
Ende des
toward the end of the Middle
Mittelalters,
Ages, when Regensburg was impoverished and needed a scapegoat,
und man dann
exclusion and
offensichtlich
discrimination of Jews
Sünden
began to
gebraucht
increase.
hat, stellen wir fest, dass die Ausgrenzung, die Diskriminierung zunimmt. Und im Jahr
It all
1519
culminated in
der Fürstung
1519,
eine
when the approximately
Vertreibung
500 people
der
living
hier
here were driven
ungefähr
out,
500 Menschen,
simply expelled from the
aus der
city.
Stadt ausgewiesen werden. Und ein paar Tage später hat man
They
dann
demolished the abandoned buildings
vermutlich
just a
aus
few
dem
days
Grund,
later,
dass man irgendwie den
probably
Eindruck
so that
erwecken
no
wollte,
one would ask what had been there
da
before.
war gar nichts. Die leerstehenden
And on the
Häuser
resulting square, they built a
abgerissen,
church,
auf
which
dem
is the
Platz
Neupfarrkirche,
Kirche gebaut.
which is why it's called Neu or New.
Deswegen heißt es dann jetzt Neupfarrplatz.
Above
Von
the
diesen
surface today,
abgerissenen
there's
Häusern
nothing to
ist
see of those
überirdisch
demolished
nichts mehr zu
houses,
sehen,
but the cellars are
aber
preserved
die Keller sind
underground.
unterirdisch erhalten.
The excavations at Neupfarrplatz took 3 years, during which time archaeologists even found a gold treasure. The documentation center doesn't have signs or a big mise-en-scène. The structure can only be accessed on guided visits. But don't let that scare you off. It's really worth it.
Time to hop on over to the other side of the pond to meet our globetrotter Steve Hainish. He's been visiting Colombia's Caribbean coast. Off we go to Cartagena.
To start things off here in Cartagena, we take part in a free tour to get an overview of the old town and all the things you need to see here in the city center.
Cartagena was founded in 1533 by a Spanish commander and became the main port for trade between Spain and its overseas empire. In 1984, Cartagena's port, fortress, and other monuments, including the walled Old Town, were designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Another cool thing to do here in Cartagena is to walk the old city wall, which is especially cool in the afternoon when you have the best light to take some awesome photographs. And this is also where you can see the contrast of the old city and the new old spot. And how to finish off an afternoon walk on the old city wall at the Café del Mar, which is probably one of the best spots to watch the sunset. Today we drove 1 hour up the coast from Cartagena to El Totumo. This is a volcano filled with hot mud, and we're basically here to take a bath in it. This volcano is 23 meters high and has a depth of 2,300 meters. So I mean, not the mud, but volcano in general. We're now walking through the neighborhood where we're staying. It's called Getsemani, and it's a really cool area. This is the up and coming neighborhood right next to the old town. We have some breakfast here in Cartagena, and then we take the bus, and then we take a moto taxi, and then we'll be in Rincón del Mar. We arrived at San Onofre and now we're taking these moto taxis. The third stop for our time in Cartagena is actually a little fishing village 3 hours south of Cartagena to get a taste of the local life and to be in a spot with way less tourists. And Rincón del Mar totally is a spot for this.
The prices for good food straight from the source were low, and the beach was simply perfect, with nobody trying to sell you souvenirs. This was truly a place to enjoy.
Pura vida in Colombia.
Right next to the historic stone bridge, you'll find the Wurstkuchel, the sausage kitchen, a true Regensburg classic. In the 12th century, the building was used as a storage room for construction equipment. Later, it was turned into an eatery. And since the beginning of the 19th century, it's where Regensburg's most famous bratwurst, or charcoal grilled sausages, are made. I've been told that your restaurant isn't to be missed. What's so special about it?
What's special here are our sausages, which we make, plus sauerkraut, which we also make ourselves.
Sechs auf Kraut. 6 on sauerkraut is the name of this typical dish. Simple, but really good. And just right if you're feeling peckish on your tour.
After being declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2006, Regensburg experienced a full-blown tourism boom. Numbers of visitors have soared ever since, and one of the main reasons for that is the growing popularity of river cruises on the Danube. Some of the locals, on the other hand, aren't too enthusiastic about their newfound fame.
In summer of 2006, the old town of Regensburg becomes a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
It's fantastic. I've hoped for this for a long time.
There were euphoric celebrations in the city.
We did it!
World Heritage status is a rare distinction, but today?
Sure, we were happy then, and we were proud, but things have gotten out of hand.
We wanted to be a World Heritage Site. Nobody really thought about the consequences. We just wanted to get in the tourist brochures. And there was a big boom back then. At first, it was nice to see so many people come, but now it's turned a little.
For some Regensburgers, the onslaught has become too much. The city continues to attract masses. Every year, the Tourism Office announces new records for overnight stays, day trippers, and cruise liners, whose passengers stroll through the old town.
I think they sometimes don't even remember what city they were in by the evening.
The number of giant river cruise ships has skyrocketed. The Danube trip is especially popular among senior American and Australian citizens, which is great for the city, but rather annoying to some locals. Many are sick of the roaring diesel engines and the constant coming and going of the waterborne hotels.
It probably can't get much more than this. But do we have to reach that maximum point, considering what it costs residents? People living over there don't like it either.
The city recently limited the number of cruise ships to 1,500 landings per year. But the boom since the UNESCO title has also brought other consequences. It's lured investors, and new construction projects are shooting up everywhere. Real estate prices have exploded, and the gentrification of the old town is progressing.
Now they also want more guided tours and hotels, while residents hardly live there anymore. There are a few students who like to party, but you can't imagine a family or an old couple there anymore. They're being forced out, unfortunately.
The number of tourists increased again last year. But now Regensburg has put forward a new tourism plan, which tries to consider both visitors' needs and the quality of life of those people who live there.
On the banks of the Danube, which during peak season is lined with cruise ships, I meet with Peter Morsbach. He heads the organization Friends of Regensburg's Old Town. It's one of the oldest citizens' initiatives in Germany, and as the name implies, it's concerned with preserving the city's historical heritage. Their most recent coup was to prevent the construction of a convention center in the Old Town. To hide from the rain, we seek cover in a former royal villa, which today houses the Bavarian Monument Office. Mr. Morsbach, you previously worked as a tourist guide in Regensburg. What's your take on this tourism boom?
I think it's very positive. I experienced the humble beginnings when there were 600 guided tours per year, and now we have more than 6,000 guided tours. It makes me happy every time I walk through the city and see people from all over the world enjoying Regensburg.
Do you also understand more critical voices, those who say it's too much for Regensburg?
I know these voices, but I don't quite understand them because, as in many cities, tourism here moves along specific paths. Just as in Prague, where it goes from the Old Town Square to the Charles Bridge to Prague Castle, here it's just over the Stone Bridge to the Cathedral to the Old Town Hall. To the left and right of this, it's calm. I don't have to walk right through the crowd when it's busy. I can also choose a side street.
Tell me a bit about the organization you lead and your work there.
Friends of the Old Town is a group that was founded in 1966 and that has no political mandate and no direct power. It's committed to raising the alarm whenever the Old Town is threatened with any danger. A concrete example was in the early 1970s when there were plans to build a major road along the Danube from one end of the Old Town to the other. We simply held a protest there and prevented it from happening.
zu protestieren und wir konnten das dann auch verhindern.
You weren't born in Regensburg, but you've lived here for a long time. What makes Regensburg so unique?
Das ist eine gute Frage.
That's a good question. I have a very strong emotional bond to the city, and I feel at home here. I always have. It was like when I stepped off the train in Rome the first time and felt I'd been there before. Now I'm half Regensburger and half Roman, so to speak. This city is very much worth living in because it's preserved its historical structure both in stone and in spirit. The whole world was in Regensburg during the Perpetual Diet. This mixture of provincial and cosmopolitan is really something beautiful.
And you're working hard to keep it that way. What would you say to a first-time visitor here in Regensburg, whether they come by cruise ship or from somewhere else in Germany? Where would you send them? What's your top recommendation?
I would put it differently. I wouldn't give any tips. Instead, I'd recommend just coming here, staying a week, and going where the wind takes you. Discover the city on foot. It's not like there's any other way to get around town, and just drift along and let the city work its magic, and then follow your interests. Are you looking for Gothic architecture in the cathedral, or are you after something romantic? Or do you just want to sit in elegant cafes, or experience the beauty of the river, or take a boat? Just let it happen.
Thanks for the talk.
Gerne.
What secrets lie behind these walls? Find out in an immersive experience and explore fascinating World Cultural Heritage sites. DW World Heritage 360. Get the app now.
If you're ever in Regensburg and looking for a really great place to eat, this is the right spot. Orphée, in the very heart of the city, is a Regensburg institution. The former brewery was taken over by students in 1977 and turned into a French-style bistro.
What I loved about Regensburg is the fact that there is an interesting story waiting around every corner, from the Romans to the Middle Ages, up to the efforts of solving early European conflicts and the Reichstag. Plus, the regional specialties are delicious. No wonder, really. We're in Bavaria after all.